Marriage and motherhood does not make you a mature woman. Okay. One of the kind of biggest myths that women are often sold, and actually all of society are sold, is that marriage and motherhood inherently creates or produces maturity and wisdom in women. And it does not. Okay. And you can be married and emotionally immature. You can be a parent and emotionally immature. Therapists literally have entire categories around emotionally immature parents. What does that tell you? And yet, a lot of girls and women are conditioned and programmed into believing that becoming a wife, somebody's wife, and becoming a mother will force or create or produce maturity. Like I say, there are so many instances in which people are in therapy because they have emotionally immature parents. They're having to navigate emotionally immature parents. The same goes, I hate to say it, I know we don't really like listening to men, but there is definitely some truth in the fact that some men have married, yes, they may have chosen to, but they've married women who are emotionally immature. And that shows up in their interactions in the relationship and in the marriage. And that isn't particularly pleasant for that man either. And here's the thing, right now, there's a lot of conversation online. I saw a number of kind of these teenage wives, because that's what they are, but they're being, labeled as young trad wives, who are having babies at 18 and 19. And they are online, strongly putting forth their case that they are adults and that therefore they of course can decide to marry and have children and that they are not indeed too young to do so. The thing is that I think that there are kind of three forms of adulthood in reality. There's legal adulthood, there's biological adulthood, and there's psychological adulthood. And it is true that in some countries around the world, at 18, you can vote, you can sign contracts, you can join the military, you can have sex, you can drink alcohol in some places in the world. And yes, you can have children. In fact, you can do that biologically as soon as you're biologically able to do so, right? None of that means that you can regulate yourself emotionally, that you understand self-authority and how you use that in your adulthood, that you have self-awareness, that you understand how to delay gratification, that you know how to set boundaries, that you have practiced healthy decision making and experienced the pros and cons and consequences. That you understand emotional responsibility. That doesn't mean that you've developed any of those things. And quite frankly, having a child at such an age where you have not developed wisdom and maturity and had a chance to road test it, stress test it, having a child is not something you want to practice those things on. And what I will say is that we know that emotionally immature, unfit parents exist across this age spectrum. But I think there is something about talking honestly about youth and the unique things that come with youth. And therefore, just having a child because you physically can is not wisdom. It's not fair on that child either. Now, am I saying that all young adults, young parents are bad parents? No. I'm not saying they are worse parents than people who have children of any age that shouldn't be having them. But I do think that we need to be very clear here about legal adulthood. When the law says you are an adult legally and what that means, and then biological adulthood in terms of the way the medical and healthcare space will treat that, okay? And then psychological adulthood. And that actually matters, okay? So the ability to conceive a child is a biological event, okay? But wisdom is developmental. Maturity is developmental. Self-regulation, these all require practice and time and consistency, okay? You have to be able to reflect, bounce back from mistakes, learn accountability, healthy accountability. That's very difficult to do at 18, 19 for starters. But equally, even if you're older than that, there are people in their 40s who get married and they lack these capacities, these capabilities. Okay. And so often there's a lot of people who believe that marriage is a sign of maturity and produces maturity. And that is in fact untrue. It's proven to be untrue. The other thing that I'm often very unpopular when I say, and I did a video about this, it's got over 500,000 views and thousands of comments, where I talked about the fact that sometimes for some women, not all, marriage and motherhood disguises their immaturity. A lot of the time they haven't stepped into adulthood psychologically. And getting married and becoming a mother becomes a distraction. And I have met many women like this. They are very childlike in reality. And because of the work and effort it takes to function like an adult woman when you're single, they don't want to do that. And so they do get married and they do become mothers. And then it allows them to be lazy in terms of their intrinsic, internal, individual development. Because now you are distracted and consumed with being somebody's wife, playing the role, performing the role of being somebody's wife and being somebody's mother. I literally do know lazy women, and I use that word. I know it's a very touchy word because everybody thinks that it's impossible for a woman to be lazy. That is not true. It's not impossible for a woman to be immature. And just because she's married, just because she's a mother, it doesn't mean she is not lazy with certain things. Again, use your critical thinking. I'm not saying that motherhood is easy. I'm certainly not saying that being somebody's wife is easier. But for some women, the roles, performing those roles, playing those roles is easier than some of the work that inevitably comes along when you are an adult, when you need to function like an adult. And the truth is, depending upon your background and the conditioning that you have received, a lot of the time when you come from a conservative and or religious background, the belief is that the man is the head of that household. He makes the decisions. The final decision sits with him. And so there are women historically and also in the present day who don't want to make certain decisions. They don't want the responsibility of making certain decisions. There was a video that went viral on TikTok of a young woman crying, sobbing in her car. She just signed a lease on an apartment. And she said that this is the thing about being single. She'd linked signing a lease with being single and said that she wanted somebody else who could make those decisions. And so there are women who hide behind these roles of wife and mother, so they don't have to do the developmental work that is required to be done as an adult woman. And the truth of the matter is, quite often as a single woman, there is no hiding. You have to understand your finances. You have to understand your money. You have to be able to regulate yourself emotionally. There's all sorts of realities that come with living as a single person, as a single woman, particularly as you age. There is no hiding. And so sometimes the identity of mother and or wife can be substitutes. Yeah? Because instead of you having to sit with who you are, who you want to become, who you want to be, the system provides a role, wife and mother. And it's quite prescriptive. There is a status quo. There is a lane for motherhood and wifehood and what's expected of you and how you're meant to show up. Religion, culture, family, they've created these roles that you have to align with, you have to slip into. Okay, even what you believe is often mandated and guided by those roles. I'll never forget that comment that came up where a woman actually said, I don't have an opinion on this. I need to, before I speak to my husband. I thought, you're a grown adult. What do you mean you can't form an opinion without speaking to your husband? Like, how old are you? What happened to your personal, individual, critical thinking skills? Psychological adulthood. There's a lot of women who function like children in marriages. They function like children, although they are mothers. And like I said, there's some women who are lazy. Now, when people hear me say that, they think that I am encouraging, women to, allow themselves to become burnt out in these corporate careers. They are, this is a capitalist world. There are women who believe that our natural divine design means that we need to rest and sit and receive only. You see, this world is just too hard for women and our biological makeup. Nonsense. That is way too extreme and unnecessary. Okay, being productive is a human thing, however you choose to do it. Whether you're doing it at home at a desk, you're doing arts and crafts, or gardening, baking, whatever your thing is. Being productive and doing something well and being rewarded for it, whether that be in terms of community, money, recognition, awards, whatever it might be, is not inherently masculine. But a lot of the time, to make your way in this world, often as a woman, as an adult woman, as a single woman, and to navigate the world alone is not easy. I never sugarcoat that. Yes, I am single by choice, and I love the freedom and the agency and the fulfillment and the unbound expression that I'm able to experience because I have chosen to remain single. I do not have to cognitively submit to a man. I do not have to censor and filter what I think and I feel and how I express myself. I'm not under an NDA because I'm married. I don't have to worry about saving face and preserving somebody else's reputation. I don't have to worry about putting my dreams and goals on hold. Okay? I'm always unapologetic about the choice to remain single, and yet, and still, it comes with responsibility. Yeah, that's why I talk about the economics of modern single womanhood. I talk about the single woman economy because actually you can't sleepwalk your way through life when you are single as a woman. It's hard enough navigating systems, okay, and a system that was not designed to have so many single women living outside of these prescribed roles of wife and motherhood and wife and mother. Okay? And so the system often tells you what a good wife is, what a good mother is. So you can just follow along. Really, you don't always have to develop self-authority because actually you're following the script that's been set out for you in those roles. Now, I'm not saying that every married woman has not done the individual work. No, that's not what I'm saying, because again, people hear what they want to hear. But actually, for eons of time in many cultures, motherhood and being somebody's wife was presented as a natural milestone, an indication of maturity and progression in life. It is not a progression. It is a life event. It is it is something you can opt into that can actually change the trajectory of your life, your health, your finances, everything, right? But it's not something or the only way a woman can be a woman. It's not the only way you can demonstrate progress and evolution as a woman at all. It is not. You are a whole human being, period. Right? How is it? I mean, I often find it quite interesting, especially when I'm speaking to women who are religious and believe in a deity and a God, that this God that you believe in created hundreds of different types of nuts and seeds and fruits and plants and trees. We are completely unaware of all the creatures that exist in the ocean or the sky. Right? I love looking at the National Geographic because, I mean, they've got all of these incredible features on parts of the world that are, almost unreachable. They don't know if anyone's inhabiting them. I can't remember the exact part of the world, but they were talking about the fact that there's seasons where the water kind of flows in from the ocean and kind of goes really high up into the top of the trees. And then there's seasons where the water recedes. And when it recedes, what's left often is carcasses, etc. And so what they do is these people who do this research, they go to that area of the world during that time, and they can obviously collect bones, they take pictures, they use drones, etc. Fascinating. You're telling me that there's this this diversity of biology, some of which we are only just discovering. And you're telling me that your God and creator created the human being who happens to be woman, a female, to only occupy the role of mother and wife? That is her only utility? That is her only value in this world, in his eyes? I find that difficult to believe. If I'm to believe this is the same God and creator that has created a myriad of colors, a myriad of flavors, tones and shades in inanimate objects. And then even when you look at animals, because there's people who love animals and believe that animals are intelligent beings or intelligent creatures. You're telling me that a squirrel can have more freedom, and we find more wonder and curiosity in animals that do not have human intellect, who do not have a conscience the way human beings do. You're telling me that there's more variety and wonder and adventure that we can observe and admire in animals, in nature. And yet women were designed for their highest value. Their quintessential experience is just being a man's wife and serving a man. That their fulfillment, their essence is unlocked when they get married, when they become a man's wife. That by cooking and cleaning, doing laundry, being sexually available to that man, that is the quintessential indicator of womanhood, of maturity, of progress, of evolution. That is absurd. It does not even align. And look, I'm nobody. I'm but a grain of sand. I often think about that the passage of scripture with Job. And of course, he was talking to God in that passage of scripture where God said to him, "Where were you when I did X, Y, Z?" You know, I'm not saying that I am an interpreter. I'm no scholar. I'm no scholar or prophetess or whatever. But I find it very interesting that we live in a world where there is this diversity, okay, that exists naturally. And yet we really, really want women to believe that the only two roles that they can occupy is mother and wife to a man, and that is maturity. That is the mountaintop. Now, when we do our invisible contract work, when we look at what the reality often of motherhood and wifehood can be for women, I mean, it doesn't deliver on the promise at all. Okay? And so, like I said, at times, you know, it's all too easy, I think, for immature, underdeveloped women with a tinge of laziness to go into motherhood and being a wife. Because actually, to be a single adult woman in this world, it requires a level of groundedness, of self-sufficiency, of maturity. Again, use your critical thinking. I'm not saying that wanting partnership, wanting to reproduce is not a natural, healthy desire. Okay? But like I say, when we look at the evidence, yeah, therapists every day, they have grown adults who are wives who are unable to regulate their emotions. Okay? They are unable to function by themselves. They're actually rather codependent on their husband. Yeah? Parentification is very common. Now, why is that? If marriage and motherhood is a sign of maturity, produces maturity, why does that happen so often? When women who are wives and mothers are unable to take accountability. You see, that whole no contact business, that whole thing about adults going no contact with their adult parents. And you've got parents who will say they have no idea why their children don't speak to them. They are unable and or unwilling to apologize. Now, is that a sign of maturity? They're often dependent upon their children for their emotional needs. The amount of times you see women say that their children gave them purpose, that their children are their best friends. Parents confiding in their children. Now, is that mature? As an adult, you should be self-sourcing and sourcing from appropriate places, not your children. Your children shouldn't be emotional crutches. Your children shouldn't be where your self-esteem sits. So, look, the last thing I will say on this as well is that, and we were discussing this in our kind of private group, is that the system benefits when women make decisions that are permanent in relation to reproduction and marriage early. If you're making these decisions before your frontal lobe has even developed, before you have developed a sense of self and you have practiced your self-authority, that's what the system wants. Okay? Because you're making permanent decisions that often impact the trajectory of your life as a woman before you've even practiced decision making. You go into situations where there's dependency. And like I say, that is compounded when you are in conservative and religious communities whereby the belief is that your husband is the one that makes decisions and thinks for you as a family. See, when we see a lot of these young women, they will be on contraception that has massive side effects, but it's easier and feels better for their husbands. Why do you think we don't see trad wives in their 40s, 50s, and 60s promoting young marriage, promoting marriage and motherhood before you've developed a sense of self? If you haven't learned who you are, what you value, your value outside of being chosen by a man, you haven't learned how to decide, how to leave, how to support yourself, then the cost of changing direction becomes much higher. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of women don't leave, of course. Yeah, there's a reason why there are women in their 50s and 60s who do not encourage younger women to make those decisions very early. And when you do hear those women, because I see a lot of those commentators, social commentators and authors out there, when they do, there's always an agenda. Always an agenda, and they will present it in ways that seem like it's thinking about the woman. You don't want to lose your ability to reproduce, so get married at 19. You don't want to be left on the shelf or have less viable men to choose from, so get married at 22 and have babies. There's always an agenda, and often if you look at their politics, etc., it will reveal to you why they want teenagers and teenage girls to get married early. These kinds of invisible contracts you can explore on a private basis in the Invisible Contract Framework booklet that is somewhere in the description. It's completely free. But you can start to look at these invisible contracts and the invisible contracts that govern women's lives in a private way. And you'll start to be able to identify and notice which ones you might well want to break. And that's somewhere in the description and the link.